just looking at what I just shared with you and kind of taking a closer look, and I'm going to overlay some data about affordability, again, based on medians. In Cheshire County, now I know Peterborough was not in Cheshire County, but some of this data I can't get by certain ways. So, but again, is this familiar? So this is the familiar thing no matter where I am. And so we're looking at in December of 4.2 months of that inventory, which again, it's just not a lot. And that's the thing. It's like, is 5 better? It's just simply saying that it's just going down. There's less homes available. And this is specific, especially what I've been able to find when I look at the data sets in this area. These are purchase prices in the Peterborough labor market area. So those are the towns: Antrim, Bennington, Fitzwilliam, Peterborough, Jaffrey. It doesn't include Keene. We've got the goldenrod being the median price of existing homes, $232,000. Again, half or below that. Are they desirable? Are they not? I have no idea. Sometimes you find a deal at 160, sometimes you don't. The new is 313. Only 8 homes were on the market that were built in the Peterborough labor market area.
What time frame is that, George?
That was in the last 9, beginning of this year. I'm sorry, beginning of this year through August. We don't have the data through right now.
2019.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is the city of Keene. Now, again, let me back up. And the reason for this volatility, I had to turn off our fail-safe of having 50 sample size or more. So this is what it looks like, and it's very erratic. Yes?
And I was just going to say, George, because for me, as I look at this, I sometimes have to pause just to take it all in. So feel free to take a little bit of time before you jump to the next slide, because I'm sort of like, what did that last slide say? What did this slide say?
Right.
So feel free, if you're saying, could you pause a moment so I can decipher what is up there?
So so that's great. So it's higher price for new homes. Very few of them built. So when it gets back to the supply, there's not a lot. And I say that little new construction, and that availability might be just as challenging as cost and affordability, because we're going to see through the data that maybe things might seem to look affordable to that median price point, but there's not a lot of them that I can see, and not a lot of transactions happening. And if you're like me, I'm the guy in the ranch who's spending tons of money to renovate it, because I have other options, but they're equally expensive. It's the same chart, but it's the city of Keene. Their housing price is a little bit different. I looked at in 2018, there were 5 new homes built. Existing is 175. So from a median perspective, again, it looks more affordable. That's as far as we kind of go. I mean, that's why data only tells part of the story.
Does this include condos, or is it
Yes.
just standalone homes?
It would include condos, any kind of primary purchase price. If I'm buying a condo for my use, it would be part of that.
And your definition of primary, again, is not second homes?
Right. If I live in Dover and I bought a house in Peterborough, we would cull that data out. We get a pretty robust data set. We'd cull that out. We cull land sales. We're looking for primary home purchases. Yes? I pointed to you and I looked at her, so I'm sorry.
Does this include bank-owned homes that are bought by people too?
It could. Yep, it could. That's a good question. I don't think we would call that out because it's the primary home sale. So it might be foreclosed. I don't think we're not going to include foreclosure auctions, but if the bank foreclosed and sold it, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry, Libby.
So in Keene, new houses were less expensive median than existing, whereas Peterborough was the other way around? Is that right?
Yeah, hopefully that's right.
Flip back and go back and forth on the slide.
Yeah, well, no, she's making a good point. New, it's less than the existing home. I'd be interested to know what that is, but again, it's just one point in time.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah. And this is the thing, so this might have been the reason it's here, but what was up here, and I think later on I started putting some numbers to it. So it's fluctuating, and that's why in most cases I probably wouldn't even tell you that data, because it's not a lot.
Yeah, the numbers are so small, it's hard to figure out.
Exactly, it's small, and that's the challenge with this, but I'm sharing it with you. Don't tell anyone else it's not being televised. So here's the town of Peterborough. And this was the same interesting thing again. And these, I think, might have been because they might have been condos, getting back to that, I'm not really sure. But there was one of them for 350,000 or so, or 500. Then there was 4 for closer to maybe 250, and then 3. So I just don't know what that is. It's not a lot of data to tell. I can say there's not a lot of housing development happening.
George, you got one too many zeros on it.
Here, hang on a second, if we can just,
One
as
too
we're doing
many
this,
zeros.
let's ask one question at a time because George has got to answer.
Okay, I put one too many zeros, Bellagio.
Sorry. Thank you.
Sorry. Does that work better now? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This is when I was starting to get blurry on it with the data, kind of same data 3 different ways. Yes.
More of a comment for all of us that are struggling. More of a comment as we're struggling to digest the slides. I was looking at them last night. They're in our links resources.
Right.
So you can go back to this presentation
Yeah.
and see the slides there.
But again, it doesn't tell a deep story. It's a trend. The thing I take away is not a lot of housing development. It fluctuates in terms of what it is. I wouldn't sit here and say we're not doing a good job. We're doing a great job. That's kind of tough to deal with. So it prompts me to want to dig deeper into what that is.
This 2 slides back.
Looking at Peterborough, a larger cut of data, and then I broke it down to look at Keene, just Keene,
Yeah, but then go back.
and then
That's 2017.
Peterborough area versus Peterborough.
so it's a bunch of
Look at the other towns.
up the top there,
So he described it as the labor, you said
labor market area
the labor market area. So where would people be living in
and working.
around this area, working in this environment? So you may have someone working at Microspec, but living in Antrim. So,
Right. And this gets back to, the economy and housing challenges aren't just, we want people that are working in Peterborough to be living in Peterborough. The economy is regional, housing is regional, and that's what the purpose of that is. But then also to say, what's going on in Keene? This was just like a random selection, we talked about it, so I wanted to say, what's going on in Keene, what's happening in Peterborough, and now what's happening in Jaffrey.
But also, it was 2017, the last Peterborough study.
I am,
Versus
right,
2019.
right, because there's no home sales, there was no new homes built, there's no more data. So that's a great point. There's nothing here because nothing was built. So even with the fail-safe off, there just wasn't anything built. There was primary home sales. Could have been a ton of seasonal homes or vacation homes.
These data seem to be complicated. It's sort of a point in time, and it doesn't really represent a trend, whatever. What about if we...
Well, it does represent a trend. Because you're taking data and looking at what's happening, and so, it's there to...
But if you only have 4, 5, 10 new houses built, you
Right.
can't extrapolate much from that.
You can't. Here's the one thing you can extrapolate. You don't have a whole lot of new housing being built. The question is, why is that?
But if you skinny the data down to just Peterborough and try to understand the market in Peterborough, is there enough data to do that and to have any meaningful...
I think the data exists asking questions here. This is where there's not enough data here. We're going to find it on the rental side as well. I think the community needs to ask itself, who are the people that we're trying to get here? What are the barriers to it? And if housing availability and supply and type and choice is answered, then the next thing is, how do we do it? I think you know organically what's being built or what's not. And I think that's your best offense, is knowing that.
Does this data include houses that people are building themselves, or just new houses that have been sold?
It's new houses that would have been sold. It wouldn't be, I just built it myself, someone sold it. I'm pretty sure of that.
so one more question for you, George, over here.
Yep.
I think that a really interesting thing is that when you look at this slide here, it says the existing median sale price being $237. So if you, right now, if you would pop on Zillow or Realtor.com and look at what's on the market in Peterborough, because that's what I do every day, right?
Right.
So the market in Peterborough, that average price is like $380 right now. And and if you look at those houses, it tells you how long they've been on the market. So they've been on the market longer and longer and longer, those prices that are over that point. Like I just listed a house at $150 and it had 7 offers in 2 days. So, yeah, so that was very good for my sellers, but just so you see that, you know, the market will only bear so much. So even though there's all these houses in the area that are $600,000, $700,000, $800,000, they're not what's selling. What's selling is $237,000. You know, because that's what people feel like that they can afford.
For this, and getting back to the point of sample size, I would be trying to look at, you know, how can I sort of count up those home sales that have happened and look at my evaluation of housing, maybe existing housing, other things that give me a deeper dive into the value of the properties that may go on the market, but then integrate that with people's preferences. Are we trying to stay in our homes longer? And so they represent housing that may not ever make it on the market, or not make it on the market for years to come. So I think part of what this is supposed to do is just sort of prompt some of these questions. Data, as I said, only goes so far, but there's deeper dive of American Community Survey data that has lots of margins of error, but at least you can say, how old is our inventory, to get a sense of desirability maybe. And I know in this part of the state, there's a lot more housing inventory that's 40 years old and older, 100 years old, certainly, yep. So, okay to move on? So we kind of talked about that. It's a similar thing. We're looking at not a lot of development in terms of new homes. We are seeing the trend lines of the existing ones. And again, not a ton of homes that go on the market for sale either, just so I want to put that into perspective, getting back to whether you think this is completely representative or not on the for sale for new and existing. It's still kind of a small number.
George, I have a question.
Yes.
So we know that there's not a lot of housing stock available, and we know that people, do the demographics line up such that, like, we've got a population rise happening in the state? You know, that we know that we're attracting millennials. We know that there's something going on, right? There are more people moving in, and I run the welcome team, and we know that there are a lot more folks between 25 and 35 coming in with and without kids, and it's kind of, we're tracking that. But is the reason why there are no homes because we've got people we've got immigration, and we've got jobs, and so we're hitting a kind of a saturation point where we can't go any further unless we get some more housing stock?
Yeah, I think that's something I'd want to look at deeper, because part of it, when I think of existing home sales, and I try to think of what I know about demographics and an aging population and their preference to age in their own house, that you've got a house on a market, a house that's part of your inventory that may not ever be available for sale for a long, long time. And so is that why the existing home sales, not a lot is happening, that there's just not a lot of people who are saying, I'm moving out. I came here a while ago and I'm staying. I don't know the answer to that. But I think you all might have a better sense of what that means. And yes, we hear, and I hear anecdotally about Millipore, other companies that are trying to attract people in, and there's a lot of commuter stuff happening. And so, yeah, that lack of supply would sort of increase demand, but I don't know if people are looking to live here necessarily, but I know there's an economy that's looking for a workforce that doesn't presently exist, or and also a workforce that may be aging out and looking to retire that's going to need a replacement workforce. So not just economic growth, but replacement of existing jobs. So that's all I can say, about that.
Thank you.
So here's the rental side. This is what it looks like in that Portsmouth labor market area. So it's all those communities.
Peterborough.
What did I say? Oops.
Anybody ready to correct them?
That's when you add another zero on the end. This is, again, the median gross rental, so that's rent and utilities. When we look at this data, about 1,030 for 2 bedrooms, and then all is 1,000. And again, the data set isn't robust. And so part of that's our challenge. We're not capturing everything, so this is important to look for trends. But it kind of It hasn't really gone down a whole lot. There's a dip in that one. Can't really explain that. I think it might just be the sample. But there's a lot going on there. So when I look at Cheshire County, when you look at the renter income and not spending more than 30%, again on your, you're talking about gross income, can afford $836 all in, so rent and utilities. And that's just saying, what's that annual income? And it's no more than 30% a month, which is a figure that's used as kind of a guidepost for what we think is affordable or not. If I'm making $200,000, 30% of my income is a lot different than if I'm making $30,000.
Excuse me, can I ask a question about how you got that figure of renter income? Thank you, is it taking into account the income of one person or households? I mean, how do you get
Yeah,
that?
so it's household income, it's not family income. So I chose that because not everybody is in a family. So, and it's an American Community Survey data that we're using. And so it's looking at renter households. So not owner households, but the median income for renter households in that
So if
area.
there are two people living there, then
There
it's
could
two
be-
incomes together.
Household can mean it's one person.
Well, I know, but if there are two independent individuals living in a house together, then it would be
Right.
under one.
Right, see, they're combining that incomes as a community survey gets that.
Just one quick comment about this. This sample here is actually pretty useful in that it looks like it represents drivable, commutable distance. And so I think it's been mentioned before in this forum to maybe coordinate across some of these towns what the policies will be, because to try and optimize things on a one-town basis is not going to be that practical.
Good point.
So here's that slide.
I don't
again.
know.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm curious I mean, I know you said where you got the data from, but I'm curious how they gather that. Because I deal with a bunch of rental properties, nobody ever asked me what the,
Good, give me your name and number. So we use UNH Survey Center, and there's mailings and there's call-outs to try to get it. It's an imperfect thing, and that's why we look at what are the trends over time. But we'd be happy to include you in it. So that's why I'm saying it. So it bears repeating. It's our survey that we do. We do it through UNH Survey Center because there isn't other data out there than looking at ACS data, which has its own large margin of error, especially when we're looking at this area. But we have a similar one. So anyway, we're always looking to get more folks, but you're right.
yeah, I'm just curious because I have no idea how anybody would gather that information unless somebody's reporting it or
They are.
or if somebody's, in the assisted or section 8, 'cause, like, I just don't know how they would gather that information because nobody's ever asked me, and I can tell you
It's
that.
probably mostly big companies.
It is.
Well, it's easier to get bigger developers, but we're trying to get as much of a cross-section. It's harder to get to. So
Well,
the
the biggest
reason
one-
we get is this is actual input from actual people getting data from those communities. Not every community may be represented if you look at it, but we're trying to endeavor to get to landlords and people that are renting. Even someone who owns a house that's just renting it, it's harder to get to. So there's certainly a challenge with that. So while you haven't been contacted, we certainly didn't make it up. But
Right, no,
we'd love to
I
give you
mean,
the data set.
I don't have a ton of rentals myself, but I
Yeah.
deal with some on my
Yeah.
family's property.
Yeah,
And one of my friends he manages 180 units between Hillsborough and Jaffrey. And I'm curious if he was called because those 180 units make up a whole big chunk.
yeah, and just a thing on that, if you had like a 40-unit building, you wouldn't take all 40 of them because it would overly skew the data. So we try to make sure that it's representative. We also don't include subsidized sort of tax credit housing in here. This is just housing that's available to anyone, not some pre-qualification process. So these are all good questions, yes.
LMA stands for labor market area,
Correct.
did you say?
Yeah.
So Temple, for example, is not in that list. Is that because the state has divided this?
It's right. It's cut into a lot of different ways. So sometimes that's the challenge here, trying to represent all that you want to represent. And so this is put together, and it's through the American Community Survey data. So you're right, Temple is not in there.
Temple's
And so they must be part of certainly another LMA.
They're in
They might
Milford.
draw Wilton.
Yeah.
Apple, Wilton, are all in Milford's like.
Yeah, okay. So if you wanted that data, we could get it, and again, it's gonna have a lot of margin of error just because it's sample size, no matter how we slice it.
What are those percentages?
Sorry, so that's the increase in rent year over from the last year, this current year to from the last year, 7.9% and 4.6.
And I assume these are all inflation-adjusted numbers, all of these charts?
No, these are what's reported out every single year. So what you can, I'm sorry?
If you're not inflation-adjusted, then it's difficult to extrapolate the trend of what's really.
So if I rented an apartment back in 2005 for $1,500, we just want to let you know what it rented for. So I wouldn't want to inflation adjust that. You can if you want to. I'm not sure what the value of that is, but we're trying to show what are median rents year over year
If we were,
as real numbers.
I think if we were looking at affordability year
Yeah.
over year, that's where adjusting for
Absolutely.
inflation would be very useful.
Yeah, affordability, right. So here's the vacancy again. This is that labor market area. And so again, it's a little bit higher than the state, but it's still pretty low vacancy rate. And again, we're not capturing all the data. It's something just to look at it. We can see that trend line kind of going in all sorts of places, and that's the challenge of not a whole lot of data. In City of Keene, there's their gross, and again, just trying to look at what's affordable from that Cheshire County income number, and then looking at the vacancy rate. And again, I put the chart up there just to kind of look at how it fluctuates. And I think that, again, going back to what I said at the outset, taking this as a jumping off point to get a deeper dive into what's going on in our region. Again, the balance market. And so this is Peterborough, and I think I put the chart in there as well. And I know Peterborough is not in Cheshire County, but I also felt like putting Hillsborough County income in there wasn't good. So here's where, again, and I say this all the time, I think it's important to get a real qualitative assessment of the range of incomes of people, especially from an employment perspective, what people are living on, to really kind of get a better sense for what's affordable where I am.
George, I think that there's work being done out of the EDA, out of Pete's office to actually we're surveying the businesses, the large businesses in the community, to actually get the pay rates.
Right.
So that we can understand what people are making in those companies, and
Right.
so we have real data.
I think that's really important because it gets back to, I think, what Carter was saying too, is like, this is a range, again, however you cut the income, there's got to be some standard to use, but I think it's important to say, there's a lot of, we were talking on the ride up of LNAs, and, that's an important market for a bunch of us that are getting older. They're going to want to maybe have the same LNA that knows what our likes and routines are, and that's tough to come by, having close proximities like that. So there's the vacancy rate in Peterborough. Again, it's low. It has its highs and lows. Looking again at just the kind of the change in the vacancy rate. So I didn't want to go through all of that so deeply, but it's just something for reference for you to know that how it might look not just in the labor market area, but in this community and a couple of others for reference. Yes.
I just want to add, I keep hearing people talk a lot about like factory jobs or production jobs, stuff like that. What about all the service jobs? I can promise you they pay half as much, if that. So, and those are the people that feed all of us. Like those are the people that keep all of our nice restaurants open. They're the people that make the character of the town itself possible. So we can talk about what a factory wage is, but I promise you that it's far more than what our average people that we see around town, we know their faces, they don't make that much. So, as much as it's important to measure that money.
Well, I think it's a great point. I would think that gets to what's going to be our methodology for getting to the next level of information. What's the engagement? Who do we talk to? Is it just through employers? Well, maybe I don't work here, so what does that mean? Or I'm the LNA that I just mentioned, that is a service worker in that realm, and it's really, really important. And that's why I go back to, and I'm glad we started out the morning this way, is, we're talking about, is it a median, is it an average? We're talking about, did we inflation adjust it? I'm just gonna say that's not where our conversation needs to go. I think it needs to go to this level. As a housing guy, I think that's why, even with all this terminology we're talking about next, in the end, if we really care about this, we don't care what the definition of workforce housing is. We do not care what affordable is. We know this affordable is different for Carter than it is for Libby, than it is for Pelagia, for me. And that's where our work begins, on the human level, personal level. And let's not stereotype. I mean, I'm reading in a newspaper where we're talking about we want unaffordable housing. I'm afraid about being burglarized on those low-income people. That's really unfortunate. This doesn't pretend to ever answer that or deal with your housing problem. It's just a way, I think, to illustrate that we are in a housing crunch on the purchase side and the rent side. And we all need to collectively do something about it in our own way that fits with the character and scale of our community, in context with community, environment, economy, and the like.
I'm looking at this vacancy rate being 2%, and as a realtor and as someone who gets people from Matt's reach out to me if you know of any units. I have people who own multifamilies that are that tell me that they literally have people who say, please don't paint the apartment, just let me move in. I think that really the vacancy rate in Peterborough is just about 0. Don't you think so?
I would have to.
Yeah, I mean, I had an office day on Thursday, and 9 requests came to me from all from the Nadnock area. Hey, can you help my sister find a place to live? Hey, can you help me? And there's no place for me to send them. I say go to Milford.
I know this might be difficult, but do you know if there's any type of data that would tell us when, based on the availability of housing, how many people aren't moving here that otherwise would? Because I mean, obviously, my parents-in-law have not moved here yet because they can't find a unit, but no one has asked them specifically. So obviously, I know you can't know exactly, but I thought perhaps that maybe if we know that there's only, say, at the housing rate, if there's only 1% of that, how did you have 4.4 months or something? Mm-hmm. When the availability of homes drops down to a certain level, that we know from survey data that this percentage of people aren't moving here that otherwise would, or something like that. I'm just wondering if there's any way of knowing if someone has done some research out there that we could draw on in a way.
I don't know if they have. I'm trying to think of an answer to that. And I kind of go back to, especially with this talk about maybe housing policy and the kind of housing we need, is that if we have a housing policy that allows housing choice and allows a supply, and if we think we're doing a good job of meeting a range of affordability and desirability, then maybe without that data they're going to come anyway because they can find a house that they actually like. And so I'm not trying to skirt that, I don't know the answer, but I also think if we help to create the conditions, we might, if we just anecdotally kind of know that parents may want to move back to, and maybe because you got to take care of them, then I think about how hard do we make it to do a detached ADUs as one solution to that, or other branches they might want to buy. How are we allowing for that to happen in a price range that respects affordability? And I think if we do that, we're back to the neighborhood that I live, which is a lot of middle-class folks of older single, younger married, 2 families. It's all alike because we found something that's desirable. But it's a good question.
I actually know the answer to that.
Oh, Ivy, tell us.
Speak in the mic, speak in the mic.
Yeah. Yes, the answer, Gary, is that people can tell when people are not moving to a place when they would otherwise be moving there. There are, you can see the trend, and if the trend is not moving, that means that there is not enough being built. And there are people who do that kind of thing.
Ivy, do you
Who
mean,
does that?
do you mean a turn, so that people in and out?
I don't know how they call it. I've
Who's
read
they?
it.
Who's the they?
It's the Yeah, I'm thinking.
I'm gonna make you think and talk.
No, can't do that. One possibility is that it is done by the agricultural department, they do it. There are a number of different people who collect that kind of information.
Okay.
So the answer is yes, there is.
So we should get that information if that exists.
It does exist, I don't have it.
No, all right, if it exists.
I think Molly was gonna say something, and then,
Yeah, and so I can't answer directly what you're asking, but having worked in communities in New Hampshire for the last 20 years, what seems different right now is that employers are saying, I cannot hire 10 people, 20 people, 5 people, etc., because there's nowhere for them to live. And so to me, in my experience, it seems like the last year or two, there's this change in thinking and new listening to employers about what housing is doing to our labor market. So I think someone must have those numbers, but employers have been very loud about that issue. It doesn't count your in-laws, well, maybe you're still working, but it is one measure of where we know we can't, the number we can't house people. Does that
so can I just do this for a second? I know this is the part of the place where you might not like me, but let me have George finish up his slides, because then we have a question that we want you guys to get together on, and then we're gonna have some time at the end of that for George to have more questions for you. But what this is an indication of is this is what you're after, the information he's bringing out of us, and how do we start to think about those questions.
Right. And now I'll just try to get into, so again, Jaffrey is similar, there's obviously some volatility in that data, with getting some numbers. But this is one I wanted to show, to getting back to some median incomes. And so this is the stratification of income in that Cheshire County. Cheshire County. Again, it doesn't include Peterborough, but he tries to look at, okay, what is that owner-occupied median income? And again, it's a guide. And then kind of looking at affordability. Again, half of them make less than that. And so we think about availability of homes that are under 240. But this is an important thing, getting back, I think, what people talk about. There's a ton of people that are overpaying for rents. And if we need some data to show it, there it is. That third of the population is paying more than 30%. They're actually paying 35%. The way ACS cuts data is 30% or more, and then 35%, but I don't think it's fair to include the 30% I think is affordable. But that number goes up into 42 and higher percent. We cut the 32 higher, 30% higher. And again, that gets back to what do we think is a fair amount. I'm going to go through these slides, and I think we'll follow back. Same thing with City of Keene. So we've got their income, what they potentially can afford, and then regardless, and so this helps bring it back to maybe, we've got this median rent, and that's not really real, and median income. When we start to get to what people are overpaying, it starts to paint a little bit more deeper picture of people. And when I go back to housing that we own, we tend to, getting back to the qualification part, we tend to have to be qualified for that, or maybe we're qualified a long time ago, and so that rate tends to be a little bit less. And now, here's Peterborough. That income from a renter perspective and owner, and these are renter households, owner households. And so here, there's some overpayment in both of those areas, about 20% of renters, and then a little bit
George,
under
stay there a
17.
second. So renter occupied, that 44,242 is household.
Right. So renter occupied household income. So cutting it by, we call it tenure. What's the median household renter income versus owner income? And I think that's going to get me, as I end with Jaffrey, the same thing. So there's a significant amount of people that are overpaying, certainly a lot more pronounced in the renter side. And that kind of gets to our living situation, what we're really dealing with. And again, based on people's incomes, that means more to people making less, and less to people making more. And I think that's the end of that. I know there was a question. Yes, go ahead.
Hi. I guess I can talk loud. I'm good at that.
Oh, she's recording that.
Thank you. I looked at this data for the town of Jaffrey when I used to work there. One of the pieces that I'd like to include is owner occupied without a mortgage. And when I looked at the data for Jaffrey, it was over 35% owner occupied without a mortgage. So think about that for a minute. In terms of those people who've paid off their mortgages are paying more than 35%, 30% of their income for housing costs, which translates to property tax, right? So did I say that clearly enough?
No. So they don't have a mortgage, so.
They don't have a mortgage.
They don't have that debt expense.
They don't have that debt expense. They're spending more than 30% of their income. And in Jaffrey, it was about 35% of those homeowners were paying more than 30% of their income on housing.
So these are retirees?
Retirees.
These are retirees likely who own their own homes and it's their property tax.
So they have to be 35% of a much lower income if they're on the
Right.
fixed.
Right.
So I just don't want to forget the senior population.
So we're gonna go Tyler,
Yes.
and then, but just so we know the time frame, I have like 2 more people, and then we gotta get to the groups, okay? So, it'll be quick.
I'm just going to reiterate what Carter touched on, what Lisa touched on, and what I had mentioned earlier, that $78,000 income, you should nowhere be buying a house for $250,000, and that's where the problem lies.
Okay, so here, go here, and then Bill, you go first, and then Bill.
Did those numbers include energy costs, or was it just property tax?
It's housing costs, so when you talk
Principal
about.
interest, taxes, and insurance.
Right, it's the same data set.
Okay, Bill?
I can give you an example of demand and probably where they're coming from on rentals. The last time, I think it was last January, I put an ad up for a 2-bedroom rental for $1,100 in Peterborough. And this was at 1 o'clock on a Saturday. By 5 o'clock, I had 23 emails about it. I think you could probably boil that down to 15 that ever really were going to be serious about it. And of those 15, 3 were looking for a different place in Peterborough that already lived in Peterborough, were looking for a different rental, and the rest of them were either out of state or out of town. So, 12 out of 15 were not from here. So that would be the queue on just one apartment. There was, what is that? 75% of the people were, so 75% were trying to come to town but couldn't. And another thing is my last 5 tenants that left our property all bought houses. They didn't go to other rentals, they all bought.
Okay, so that gets us a lot of good information. And so what we want you to do now, we're going to come back to our triads. The questions are on the board there. What struck you about what you've heard? What do you think the implications are for Peterborough based on what you have learned? So try to find pairs that you haven't been with or triads that you haven't been with. We'll get together. We got those 2 questions. Let's work around that. I'll give you a heads up about where we're at. But dig into those questions, and then we'll have a little bit of time if there's other further observations and questions for George.